Before she became Machine Gun Helena, she had to survive day one. Just after sunrise on a quiet Sunday, a brand-new American cruiser sat tied to a pier at Pearl Harbor. A single torpedo ran low in the water, sliding beneath a moored ship and smashing into Helena's side. The lights died, compartments flooded. For a few seconds there was only confusion, the kind that turns ships into memorials. And then the ship's heartbeat came back. A diesel generator kicked in. Guns found power. Crews who had drilled in peacetime started doing the next right thing at wartime speed. Here's the question that drives this episode. How does a ship take a surprise torpedo on the first morning of a world war and keep fighting within minutes? And what habits, designs, and decisions made that possible? The answers start years before the attack. Helena was part of the St. Louis subclass of the Brooklyn-type light cruisers, treaty ships that squeezed firepower, speed, and endurance into about 10,000 tons. The designers bet on volume of fire. 15 6-inch guns and 5 triple turrets could throw a storm of shells faster than heavier cruisers could answer. They added dual-purpose 5-inch guns to fight planes or surface targets and built in enough speed, roughly 32-33 knots, to run with destroyers or dash to cover carriers. In a world limited by naval treaties and rising threats, this was America's fast-punch cruiser, win by seeing first, and shooting a lot. Helena's story begins in the New York Navy Yard. The keel went down December 9, 1936. She was launched August 28, 1938, and fully commissioned September 18, 1939, just weeks after war broke out in Europe. A peacetime crew took her south for shakedown, learning how every system breathed under strain. In early February 1940, they swung by Montevideo, Uruguay, and looked across the water at a fresh ghost. The wreck of the German pocket battleship, Admiral Graf Spee, scuttled after the Battle of the River Plate. A young Helena officer, Ensign Richard D. Sampson, photographed the wreck for an intelligence packet, a small sign that even in neutral waters, the U.S. Navy was already paying hard attention. Those months at sea forged culture. Gun crews drilled the rhythm of triple turrets, load, ram, seal, fire, repeat, until it felt automatic. Damage control teams practiced isolating flooded spaces and routing emergency power. Fire control crews trained on directors and range keepers, knowing that new radar sets were coming that would one day let them see through night and weather. The point of all that practice is simple. Under shock, people do not rise to the moment. They fall to the level of their training. Helena's training was getting sharper every week. By 1941, she had shifted to the Pacific Fleet. The days felt routine, line ahead, gunnery shoots, engineering drills, but tension kept rising. On December 7, 1941, Helena was tied up at the 1010 dock at Pearl Harbor. Outboard of her lay the old minelayer Oglala. That detail matters because when the attack began shortly before 8 a.m., a Japanese torpedo aimed from the Navy yard side ran under Oglala and detonated against Helena's starboard side. Power cables to the main and 5-inch batteries were severed. For a breath, the ship was blind. Then training took over. Within a few minutes, the forward diesel generator was online and feeding power to the mounts. Helena, freshly torpedoed, was back in the fight. Oglala, mortally damaged by the shock passing beneath her hull, would later roll and capsize along the pier. What did back in the fight look like? According to Helena's action report, her crews expended roughly 375 rounds of 5-inch ammunition, 3,000 rounds of 1.1-inch fire, and about 5,000 rounds of 50-caliber machine gun ammo during the attack. That was possible only because damage control teams were sealing compartments, routing power, and keeping ammunition moving while gunners did their work. The result was more than numbers. It was a living ship. Survival had a price. The official Navy account records 34 killed and 69 wounded on Helena that morning, many from flash burns and blast when the torpedo hit. Those numbers are cold on paper. On deck, they were friends, shipmates, and, suddenly, absences. The only reason the list wasn't longer is that drills turned into decisions, and decisions turned into actions in the few minutes when it mattered most. After the smoke cleared, tugs slid the damaged cruiser into dry dock. Sailors could stand on the dock edge and look straight into the torn side, a jagged metal wound that made the new war feel very old. Repair meant more than patching holes. As 1942 unfolded, Helena received the updates that would make her a terror at night. Modern SG surface search radar, SC air search radar, and radar-guided fire control for both main and secondary batteries, along with a heavier anti-aircraft battery. The armored conning tower that blocked all-around visibility in a night fight came off. Lighter, more open bridges and better directors took its place. The ship that limped out of Pearl Harbor would return leaner, faster to react, and much harder to surprise. But tech alone doesn't pull you through the first minutes of a war. People do. So let's go back into the ship on that morning and watch what those people did. When the torpedo ripped the starboard side, compartments flooded fast. The priority list was simple and brutal. Stop the water, keep the power, feed the guns. Valve teams isolated damage boundaries. Electricians ran portable leads and cut in the forward diesel to restore power to mounts and directors. Shell handlers formed bucket brigades to keep ammunition moving when hoists stalled. Talkers kept calm voices on the sound-powered phones, no yelling, just short, clear phrases that cut through the chaos. That calm gave the gun captains the seconds they needed to aim and fire. It also gave wounded shipmates a chance to be carried to aid stations and out of smoke-filled spaces before the ship's list made ladders treacherous. The attack lasted minutes that felt like hours. When it ended, Helena was still alive. She had done what ships are built to do, take punishment and answer back. She had also learned her first hard lessons of the war. Lesson 1. Redundant power saves lives. Without that diesel, her guns would have stayed silent in the most important minutes of December 7th. Lesson 2. Damage control is combat. Wrenches, hoses, and shoring timber are as much weapons as guns when the hull is open to the sea. Lesson 3. Training is destiny. You do not invent good procedures while you're flooding. You execute the ones you practiced yesterday. Those lessons would shape everything Helena did next. Repairs moved fast because the whole Navy was moving fast. By mid-1942, Helena was back at sea, cleaner lines, better sensors, heavier AA, and headed for a new kind of fight. Blackwater melees in the Solomons, where radar would matter more than daylight optics, and where a ship that could find and fire first could write the night's outcome. At Cape Esperance and later in the brutal first night of the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, Helena's rate of fire and new SG radar helped her put shells on target faster than Japanese lookouts could react. The pace was so shocking that some Japanese accounts joked the Americans had built 6-inch machine guns. The nickname stuck, but that is the Helena of Part 2. The Helena of Part 1 ends here, patched, modernized, and pointed back across the Pacific with a crew who had already faced their worst morning and kept their ship alive. Hold that first picture in your mind. A torpedo slams home, lights go out, and then a low thrum as emergency power returns and the guns begin to speak. If you want to understand how Helena became a legend in the night, start with the men who refused to let day one be the last day. Now, the question for next time. In a place the sailors called the slot, how do radar screens, doctrine, and a blistering rate of fire turn a confused nighttime collision of ships into the U.S. Navy's first clear surface victory of the campaign? And what does it cost to learn those lessons in real time? Join me in Part 2, Night School, Cape Esperance, and the Birth of Machine Gun, Helena, where we watch the technology added after Pearl Harbor meet the tactics that had to be invented on the fly. When your radar sees first, your guns speak first. It's past 11 p.m. in the Solomon Islands. The moon is down. Rain squalls drift like curtains. 2 columns of warships are feeling their way toward each other near Cape Esperance. One American, one Japanese. Only one side carries the newest surface search radar. Only one side understands what that means in the dark. Here's our question tonight. Did technology or tactics decide what happened next, and how did USS Helena help teach the U.S. Navy to fight at night? We're going to answer that by walking minute by minute through a battle that flipped the story of Guadalcanal, then set up even harder lessons to come. By October 1942, Guadalcanal was a grind. Day belonged to U.S. aircraft flying from Henderson Field. Night belonged to the Tokyo Express. Fast Japanese destroyers rushing men and shells down the slot. Every run that got through kept Japanese positions alive. Every bombardment of Henderson Field threatened U.S. air power on the island. That's why night fighting mattered. Stop the convoys, stop the bombardments, and the balance shifts. Fail, and Guadalcanal starves. Rear Admiral Norman Scott took a mixed cruiser-destroyer force out to ambush a Japanese bombardment group. Heavy cruisers, San Francisco and Salt Lake City. Light cruisers, Boise and Helena, and 5 destroyers, Fahrenholt, Duncan, Laffey, Buchanan, McCalla. Only Boise and Helena had the new SG surface search radar. Scott still flew his flag in San Francisco, which meant some of the best eyes in the task force weren't on the flagship's bridge. Facing them, Rear Admiral Aritomo Goto with 3 heavy cruisers, Ioba, flag, Furutaka, Kinugasa, plus destroyers Fubuki and Hatsuyuki, moving to smash Henderson Field before dawn. Scott's simple plan fit the technology. Steam in single column, destroyers at the ends, search with radar across a wide arc, and if a target appears, the destroyers illuminate and launch torpedoes while the cruisers open fire fast. No waiting for detailed orders from the flagship. At 22:33, the Americans shook into battle formation. Fahrenholt, Duncan, Laffey, then the cruisers, with Buchanan and McCalla at the rear. It was inky dark. The sea horizon was gone. Just before 23:30, Helena and Salt Lake City began picking up contacts, ships coming out of the last rain squall at about 27,700 yards. The Japanese had no radar and didn't realize an American column was crossing their T, the worst position to be in. Your ships are nose on, while the enemy can bring full broadsides to bear. But inside Scott's formation, there was confusion. A misunderstood turn order had jumbled the van destroyers, and when Helena and Boise reported radar tracks, Scott briefly thought his cruisers were seeing friendly destroyers, not the enemy line. Seconds mattered. At 23:46, Helena sent the standard code asking permission to open fire. "Interrogatory, Roger?" Scott's reply, "Roger," only meant message received, not "you are cleared." On Helena's decks, they took it as a green light. Her 6-inch batteries roared first, Boise and Salt Lake City joined in. And then even San Francisco opened up as Scott realized what the radar ships already knew. The enemy was in the trap. In the first flashes, Ioba, surprised and still flashing recognition signals, was smashed across her superstructure and bridge. Goto was mortally wounded within minutes. Scott, still worried about friendly fire, ordered a ceasefire at 23:47, then, after confirming his own destroyer Fahrenholt wasn't in the line of fire, resumed shooting at 23:51. By then, Ioba was turning away under a smokescreen, and the Americans shifted to Furutaka. Hits touched off her torpedo mounts. A Buchanan torpedo punched the forward engine room. Furutaka would not see morning. Meanwhile, the destroyer Fubuki was caught at close range and pummeled so hard she went down inside the hour. None of this was tidy. Duncan, believing the van destroyers were charging, dashed off alone for a torpedo attack and got chewed by both sides before she later sank. Fahrenholt took painful hits, some likely American in the crossfire, before clawing clear. And when Boise chased the retreating Kinugasa, 2 enemy shells found her forward magazines around 0010. For a moment, Boise hovered on the edge of a catastrophic explosion. Quick flooding and luck kept her alive, but nearly 100 sailors died in the blast and the fires that followed. Salt Lake City took damaging hits too. By 00:20, the night fell quiet again. Scott did not pursue far and gathered his bruised ships. On points, the Americans had won. Furutaka and Fubuki sunk, Ioba broken, but it had been a knife fight, not a clinic. So, what actually decided Cape Esperance? Start with the radar. Helena's and Boise's SG sets gave the U.S. an invisible sightline through rain and darkness. They saw first, oriented first, and fired first. That first minute, 23:46 to 23:47, created the shock that ruined Goto's plan and leadership. The Japanese night optics were excellent, but they were still blind against radar during the approach. But radar alone doesn't explain the outcome. Doctrine and execution were messy. Scott's misunderstood turn order scrambled his van. He briefly mistook radar tracks for friendlies. He halted shooting for 4 crucial minutes out of caution. His destroyers didn't deliver the coordinated torpedo strike his plan envisioned. Duncan went on a solo run and paid for it. In short, the Americans won while stumbling, because the first salvos landed with devastating effect and because the column geometry accidentally crossed the enemy's T. The U.S. would misread this success as proof gunfire alone could dominate the night, an idea that would be bloodily corrected at Tassafaronga weeks later. Where does Helena fit into that story? Right at the pivot. Her SG radar was among the first to see the enemy out of the rain squalls. Her bridge pressed for the open fire order. Her 6-inch batteries cycled so fast that observers, friend and foe, remarked on the volume and tempo of her fire. In later Japanese commentary, Helena's gunnery inspired a backhanded compliment. Americans must have built a cruiser with 6-inch machine guns. The line became part of her legend. A nickname wrapped around a fact. Trained crews and modern fire control can turn 6-inch turrets into something that feels automatic in the dark. And yet, even on a night the Americans called a victory, the strategic picture stayed complicated. Goto's bombardment group was driven off, but the separate Japanese reinforcement convoy under Rear Admiral Jojima completed its unloading on Guadalcanal and slipped away in the dark. 4 of its destroyers that turned back to help Goto's damaged ships were caught by Henderson Field aircraft the next day, and 2 went down under air attack. Cape Esperance slowed the enemy's rhythm, but it did not end the Tokyo Express. The campaign would grind on. What went right tactically? Radar pickup at range, crossing the T, and immediate, concentrated cruiser gunfire that wrecked the enemy flagship before she could coordinate a reply. What went wrong? Miscommunications, that interrogatory Roger, Roger exchange, a confused column turn, friendly fire risk on Fahrenholt, a lone wolf torpedo attack by Duncan, and an aggressive chase that exposed Boise to Kinugasa's 8-inch shells and a near-magazine disaster. Those contradictions are why Cape Esperance is so instructive. It shows how a Navy still learning night doctrine could win with new sensors and raw gunnery, and how easily that lesson could be misused. So, back to our opening question, radar or doctrine? The honest answer is both, in sequence. Radar let Helena and her sisters find. Doctrine, imperfect but evolving, let them shoot. Where doctrine failed, courage and training filled the cracks. And the reputation started here, the fast-cycling 6-inch broadsides that would make sailors talk about an American cruiser armed with machine guns. Cape Esperance didn't make Helena invincible. It made her known. Before we leave the night, remember what this victory actually bought. 1 fewer bombardment of Henderson Field, 1 more day for Marines and Seabees to keep the airstrip fighting, and a signal to both navies that the Americans could win in the dark. But the sea around Guadalcanal wasn't done teaching. Next time, we step into a storm even closer and meaner. Part 3, Into the Maelstrom, the first naval battle of Guadalcanal. What happens when battleships and destroyers collide at point-blank range in rain and searchlights, when the radios jam with overlapping voices, and when every lesson from tonight is tested in the harshest way? We'll follow Helena into that knife fight and ask what it costs to learn doctrine while you're under fire. Knife fight range, battleships in the dark, no one is in perfect control. Close your eyes and listen for a second. Rain squalls, engines at 15 knots, the crackle of short-range radios, and the creak of men waiting at their guns. It's just before 1:30 a.m., 13th of November 1942. 2 columns of warships are drifting toward each other near Cape Esperance off Guadalcanal. 1 Japanese, 1 American. The Japanese plan is simple. Slip in, bombard Henderson Field to silence the Cactus Air Force, and open the way for reinforcements. The American plan is even simpler. Stop them, no matter what it costs. Here's the question we're answering tonight. In a night where radar, courage, and confusion all show up at once, what really decides the fight? And how does USS Helena help turn a near disaster into a bloody, necessary win? Guadalcanal had become a rhythm of misery. By day, U.S. planes ruled from Henderson Field. By night, the Tokyo Express ran troops and shells down the slot and, when it could, hammered the airfield with battleship guns. If the Americans failed to stop a bombardment, the next dawn could find the airstrip cratered and the Marines isolated. That's the strategic stake of this hour. Keep the field alive. Keep the island alive. Naval History and Heritage Command. Rear Admiral Daniel J. Callahan led a mixed American force. Heavy cruisers San Francisco and Portland, light cruisers Helena, Juno, and the AA cruiser Atlanta, with destroyers in the van and rear. Only some ships had the latest SG surface search radar. The flagship San Francisco did not. The Japanese, under Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe, brought 2 fast battleships, Hayae, his flagship, and Kirishima, the light cruiser Nagara, and a screen of destroyers, all loaded with bombardment ammo for Henderson Field. If Abe gets through, he pounds the airfield. If he doesn't, his convoy must try again. Just after 1:24 a.m., American radars start to catch shapes sliding out of the weather. But radio discipline cracks. Reports don't flow cleanly to Callahan. The TBS voice nets fill with overlapping calls, and a misunderstood maneuver order scrambles the lead destroyers. Seconds count. The U.S. column is drifting into the Japanese line from an angle that could be perfect, crossing the enemy's T, but the commander who must make that advantage real is still unsure what his forward ships are seeing. This isn't a textbook intercept. It's a collision in the dark. At 1:48 a.m., the Japanese blink on searchlights. One beam catches Atlanta at almost point-blank range, and all hell breaks loose. Gun captains fire on anything that lights up, destroyers launch and dodge, formations dissolve into a swirling barroom brawl. Callahan shouts the now famous nearly impossible order, odd ships fire to starboard, even to port, but there were no numbers assigned, and the line is already tangled. In a minute, it's a melee of silhouettes, tracers, and shock waves in the black water. Where is Helena in this storm? Right in the pocket where technology meets reflex. Her SG radar has been seeing through the squalls. Her gunnery teams have trained to cycle those triple 6-inch turrets as if they were on a metronome. When a Japanese destroyer throws searchlights up, Helena snaps a radar solution and answers fast. Akatsuki, the destroyer that lit up Atlanta, takes a hurricane of shells from Helena and other ships and blows apart within minutes. When a Matsukaze looms out of the dark, Helena's salvos smash her steering and guns until other Japanese destroyers force a break in the engagement. This is what see first, shoot first looks like in real time. But radar and rate of fire are not force fields. In the same minutes, the American van is being chewed up. Cushing is battered and doomed. Barton slows to avoid a collision and is split in half by torpedoes. Duncan, charging alone, is wrecked by crossfire. Laffey survives a hair-raising pass so close to Hayae that the battleship can't depress her big guns far enough to hit. Laffey rakes Hayae's bridge and kills key staff, a shock that ripples through the Japanese flagship's command team. Boise, chasing hard, is punched by 8-inch shells that barely miss her magazines. San Francisco takes a terrible beating, trading heavy fire at moments with friend and foe in the chaos. Both admirals, Callahan aboard San Francisco and Norman Scott aboard Atlanta, are killed. This is the price of learning doctrine under fire. And yet, the damage to the Japanese plan is real. With searchlights blazing, Hiei becomes a magnet for American fire, destroyers up close, cruisers at short range, all hammering superstructure and steering. Her rudder and topside command spaces are mauled. Abe's carefully timed bombardment dissolves. At 2:26 a.m., with both sides bloodied and intermingled, the fight staggers to a stop by mutual exhaustion and order. On the American side, Captain Gilbert Hoover of Helena, now the senior surviving officer in fighting shape, orders a disengagement to gather the wounded ships. The immediate mission, preventing a battleship bombardment of Henderson Field, has been achieved. At dawn, Hiei is a crippled hulk, and U.S. aircraft will spend the day finishing her. The airfield lives to fly. The campaign balance bends, just a little, toward the Americans. What did Helena specifically do in that? First, she demonstrated the night-fighting edge that radar could give when a crew trusted it. She was among the first to spot and engage through rain and smoke, and her fast, accurate broadsides helped erase the ship that lit the trap and forced Amatsukaze off the board. Second, when senior commanders were lost, Helena's captain did what combat demands. He stabilized the formation long enough to keep it from shattering entirely. The battle was not elegant. It did not need to be. It needed to stop a bombardment, and it did. Now the cost. By sunrise, Atlanta, Cushing, Monson, Laffey, and Barton are gone or dying. Portland, San Francisco, and Aaron Ward are limping. As the survivors head south later that morning, submarine I-26 fires a spread. One torpedo hits Juneau near her magazines. She vanishes in a single, brutal explosion. Among the hundreds lost are the 5 Sullivan brothers. Even in victory, this campaign collects debts. So what actually decided the night? Start with radar, not as magic, but as a force multiplier. Ships like Helena could create surprise, hold contact through weather, and deliver first concentrated salvos. But radar had to be matched by doctrine: who talks, who shoots, and who decides. Otherwise the advantage leaks away in confusion. Callahan's choice to command from a ship without SG radar, the muddled turn orders, and the famous odd to starboard, even to port call, all show a fleet still learning how to fight with its new eyes. After the battle, the Navy wrote it plainly. Better integration of radar information, stricter radio discipline, and pre-planned torpedo doctrine were needed so a force could strike as one, not as a set of brave ships fighting their own private wars in the dark. In short, radar lets you find, doctrine lets you win. This night also changed the psychology of the campaign. The Japanese had counted on their night-fighting skill and the terror of battleship bombardment to break Henderson Field and the Marines who held it. Instead, a battered American column slammed into their plan and, at ruinous cost, made it fail. The next time a bombardment force tried to come through, the Americans would be more ready. They would still make mistakes. They would still pay. But they had proof now that the dark could be contested. If you're looking for a clean scoreboard, there isn't one. The U.S. lost more ships that night. The Japanese lost the day after. But the purpose of the fight was won in the first hour. Henderson was not shelled. The planes flew at dawn. And in the logbooks of ships like Helena, raw experience began to harden into methods. Combat information centers to centralize radar, clearer fire orders, practice torpedo tactics, and trust in the screen to do its job without guesswork over the radio. Those are the quiet changes that turn a close-run scrape into a foundation for future battles. So, answer our opening question. In this night of battleships at knife range, did technology or tactics decide it? The truth is layered. Technology, SG radar, gave Helena her edge to strike first and strike true through weather and smoke. Tactics, often improvised, kept the formation from falling apart and focused enough fire to wreck the enemy flagship's plan. And training, the reflex to load, fire, shift, and fire again, made 6-inch turrets feel to Japanese eyes like machine guns. Cape Esperance had hinted at that reputation. This night carved it in. Hold one image as we close. Star shells lifting, a searchlight dying under a hail of 6-inch shells, and a wounded battleship trying to turn while her captain can barely steer. That moment, messy, human, terrifying, bought a day for the men on Guadalcanal. It also bought time for a Navy to finish learning how to see and fight in the dark. With lessons banked, 1943 brings new tools and a deadlier front. In our next episode, Part 4, New Tricks. New Georgia, a near-invisible invention arrives that changes anti-air warfare, the proximity fuse. Helena will use it as the Allies push toward Munda, and will ask a fresh question. When technology tilts the sky in your favor, how do you keep from getting careless on the sea? Join me for the next step up the slot. A near-invisible invention changes anti-air warfare forever. Picture a 5-inch shell spinning out of a cruiser's gun and thinking as it flies, listening for a target, judging distance in the last split second, and bursting at just the right moment. No timer to guess, no direct hit required, just a small radio brain that turns near misses into kills. Here's our question tonight. When that invention, called the VT or proximity fuse, arrived in the Solomons, did it simply make ships safer from the sky, or did it change how sailors fought on the sea as well? We'll answer that through the ship that put it to work first in combat, USS Helena. Let's make the tech simple. Before VT fuses, you had two main choices: an impact fuse, great if you actually hit the plane, which is hard, or a time fuse, which you set by best guess so the shell bursts near where the target might be. The VT fuse hit a tiny radio set and a battery inside the shell's nose. As the shell flew, it broadcast a signal. When the signal bounced back stronger, meaning a target was very close, the fuse armed and detonated the shell automatically at the most lethal distance. That multiplied your odds because you didn't have to be perfect anymore. Close was suddenly good enough. The program was so secret the Navy called it VT, for variable time to hide, that it was really radio-controlled. Crews were told to throw any duds overboard so the enemy couldn't study them. Now put that into a specific place and time. In early January 1943, Helena steamed with other cruisers to bombard Munda Airfield on New Georgia, part of a slow, grinding push to break Japan's hold in the Central Solomons. In the small hours of 5th of January, the task group shelled Munda. At mid-morning, as they recovered their seaplanes near Guadalcanal, Japanese dive bombers slashed in. Helena's 5-inch crews had a handful of the new VT-fused rounds. They fired and made history. A D-3A Val that had just screamed past became the first confirmed combat kill by a proximity-fused naval shell. In some accounts, only 2 rounds were needed. Either way, the effect on morale was electric. For the first time, sailors saw a defensive round do exactly what the scientists promised. Why does one downed bomber matter in a war of thousands? Because it proved the fuse worked in real combat, in salt air, at ship's roll, with gunners under stress. Within weeks, the Navy accelerated VT issue to more ships. You can measure the ripple 2 ways. First, in the air, fewer successful enemy bombing runs as shell bursts became deadlier. And second, in how captains allocated precious training time. If your AA batteries can now do more with less, do you keep drilling AA above all else, or do you shift hard into the night gunnery and radar tactics that win or lose the slot? Hold that thought. We'll come back to it. Meanwhile, Helena was not a lab. She was a workhorse. Through January-May 1943, she pounded Munda and Villa Stanmore and covered landings and troop movements that set the table for the New Georgia campaign. These were not headline battles. They were the nightly chores that bend a campaign: run in under darkness, batter airfields and supply points, retire before daylight air attack, repeat. Navy histories record bombardments and counter-moves at Villa in late January, and further strikes in March and May, all aimed at cracking the shield around Munda and isolating Japanese garrisons. Each run taught the same lesson: if you control the night approaches and keep enemy air worried at dawn, Henderson Field can keep flying, and the Marines and soldiers on the ground can keep pushing. The VT fuse slotted into that rhythm as a kind of quiet insurance policy. No one in Helena's crew thought it made them invincible. They'd been at Pearl Harbor and Guadalcanal and knew better. But the fuse took some luck out of the equation. It made near miss a meaningful phrase. And because it multiplied the effectiveness of each 5-inch round, it freed mental bandwidth. If your AA teams can break up an attack quicker, your bridge can think more about surface contact and maneuver instead of bracing for damage control. A small brain in a shell changed human behavior on a bridge. By the summer, the Allies' plan in the Central Solomons was clear. Under the larger umbrella of Operation Cartwheel, U.S. forces would seize Rendova to stage against Munda, then drive up the chain, interdicting the Kolombangara runs, the nightly shuttles that fed Japanese troops via Villa and barges across Kula Gulf. Rear Admiral Walden Ainsworth's cruiser-destroyer group, with Helena as a core shooter, was tasked to smash those runs, shell Vila and Barroco, and cover landings at Rice Anchorage. The mission depended on three things: radar to find, gunnery to hit, and AA to live until dark again. VT helped the third, which protected the first two. Let's pause on that balance because it's the hinge of this episode. If you're planning night operations in the slot in 1943 and your training hours are limited, where do you spend them? On AA drills, betting the sky will kill you if you ease up? Or on night gunnery and radar doctrine, betting that if you strike first and strike clean, the sky won't get its best shots? Helena's winter and spring argued for a blended answer. The VT fuse did not replace discipline, it rewarded it. Crews who kept their directors aligned and their fuses handled correctly turned a powerful tool into a decisive edge. Crews who got sloppy found that a miracle fuse couldn't fix a bad formation or a missed contact. Technology widened the margin, but human choices used that margin, or wasted it. All spring the pattern held: bombard by night, brace by day, move the line. The Allies ringed Munda closer. Airfields that woke up in the morning damaged woke up in the evening a little more damaged. Barges that tried to scuttle troops across Kula Gulf ran into cruisers and destroyers that were learning to pair SG radar with hard, fast shooting. Japanese commanders still pushed supplies down the slot, but each run was pricier. The table was set for a clash everyone could feel coming. If the Americans kept hammering Vila and screening troops ashore, a Tokyo Express strike would come through Kula Gulf to break the pressure. It did, and Helena would be in the lead. Before we turn that page, come back to the small device that opened this story. The Navy would later call the VT fuse one of the war's most important inventions, and rightly so. It was a triumph of physics and mass production packed into the nose of a 5-inch round. But the reason we're talking about it here in New Georgia in 1943 is not just because it shot down a single Val. It's because that success shored up the confidence of crews who had to make hard choices every night. It let captains believe their ships could survive dawn, which let them take the risks at midnight that a campaign demands. A near-invisible invention changed the psychology of the fight. So, our opening question: did VT simply make ships safer, or did it change how sailors fought? The honest answer is both. It reduced the cost of being under the bomber's shadow, and it enabled bolder surface tactics because survival odds at dawn ticked up. For Helena, it was one more reason to be aggressive at night. If you can outsee and outshoot, and you're a little harder to hit from above, you can force the terms of the battle. Hold that thought as we step to the edge of the next night. Ainsworth's group will run up the slot, bombard Vila and Barroco to cover troops landing at Rice Anchorage, and then pivot into Kula Gulf to cut off a fresh Japanese reinforcement run. Helena will be blazing, literally, her 6-inch batteries cycling so fast that some will swear she carries 6-inch machine guns. But muzzle flash can be a beacon, and the enemy's torpedoes are the deadliest in the Pacific. 3 white wakes will soon be angling in. Next time, Part 5, Kula Gulf, the ship that wouldn't die. When radar and rate of fire meet the long-lance torpedo, which decides the night? And can discipline and courage save men after steel fails? Join me as Helena fights her last fight and writes a legend on the way down. 3 white wakes, 1 cruiser lit up like a lighthouse. That's how the men of USS Helena remembered the last minutes before the water closed over her. But here's the real question this episode will chase. When your guns make you visible and your enemy's torpedoes run fast, far, and deep, what saves a crew? Tactics? Training? Or the choices you make in the dark, minute by minute? Tonight we go into Kula Gulf, 6 July 1943, and follow Helena's final fight from first radar blip to the last raft hauled aboard at dawn. Stay with me to the end. We'll set up our epilogue about the wreck's 2018 discovery and what the sea kept for 75 years. Helena is center ship in Rear Admiral Walden "Pug" Ainsworth's night fighting group, 3 fast light cruisers, Honolulu, St. Louis, and Helena, with 4 Fletcher-class destroyers screening. The mission is simple to say and hard to do. Run up the slot, hit Japanese reinforcement traffic bound for Kolombangara, and get clear before sunrise brings bombers. On the other side, Japanese destroyers are making a Tokyo Express run to Vila, 10 sleek Greyhounds led by Niizuki, Rear Admiral Taro Akiyama's flagship. Both sides know the other is coming. Both plan to hit first. The night is ugly. No moon, low squalls, visibility dropping under a mile. But American SG radar eats weather for breakfast. Around Oro 136, scopes on the cruisers begin to paint returns. The group closes, line ahead, doctrine drilled after the chaotic brawls off Guadalcanal. Ainsworth wants to use radar gunfire to overwhelm the lead enemy ships and crack the column. The Americans have learned that in the Solomons, first effective salvo often decides the night. Warfare History Network. At Era 157 the column speaks. Hundreds of 6-inch shells tear out into the dark. The first target is Niizuki, and she is mauled, her bridge and topside gear shattered, Admiral Akiyama among roughly 300 dead. But Helena has a problem. Just hours earlier, the cruisers had hammered Vila and Barocco. Helena's supply of flashless powder was largely spent. Now her 6-inch broadsides bloom into huge orange fans. Every salvo marks her like a flare. The nickname Machine Gun Helena, earned for her blistering rate of fire, cuts both ways tonight. The Japanese, veterans at night fighting, don't need a perfect solution when a glowing aiming point is handing them one. 2 destroyers, Suzukaze and Tanakaze, slip in the dark and fire spreads of Type 93 long-lance torpedoes. Oxygen-fueled, quick, and long-legged, they are the most dangerous weapons in the Pacific. While Niizuki is dying under shell fire, her consort's fish are already running. Helena keeps pounding, her rate of fire is staggering, but the geometry is turning against her. O2-O3. The first torpedo slams into Helena's port bow just abaft turret 1. The blast all but severs the forward section. The bow twists and finally tears away. For a heartbeat, the ship is still fighting, aft turrets cycling, engines answering, but physics is relentless. O2-O5. A second torpedo hits port amidships near frame 82, deep below the belt. O2-O6. A third hits close by, also deep. The keel is compromised, bulkheads let go. Helena jackknifes near frame 82, the mid-body sagging into the sea. Within about 20 minutes of the first hit, the ship breaks and goes under. Middle first, the stern rising almost vertical as it slides from sight. The ripped-off bow floats. In the darkness, the shock gives way to motion. Abandoned ship. Now the measure of a crew shows. Damage control discipline doesn't stop when a hull fails. It becomes survival discipline. Rafts go over. Whaleboats are cut away. Parties muster wounded. Officers and petty officers count heads by division because that's how they've practiced, even if count now means voices in the black water. Some men climb onto the still buoyant bow. Others cluster around floater nets and cork rafts. Oil burns throats. Life jackets ride high, and every man knows daylight could bring Japanese aircraft. The fear isn't abstract. At dawn, open water becomes a killing ground. Back up the column, Ainsworth's destroyers Nicholas and Radford get orders no sailor forgets. Turn back into Kula Gulf and start pulling Helena's men out. Fast. They do it under threat of more torpedo runs and with moment-to-moment radar contacts in the murk. Boat crews volunteer, go over the side, and start handing people up the nets. When new enemy contacts loom, the destroyers break off, drive them away with guns and bluff, then return to the rescue. By dawn, they have hundreds aboard, decks black with oil-soaked sailors, the wounded filling any space below. Photos from that morning show Radford entering Tulagi Harbor with her decks crowded with Helena's men. Those 2 Fletchers were later awarded the Presidential Unit Citation for this night's work. But not everyone could be reached before the sun came up. A third group, led by Helena's Captain Charles P. Cecil, who refused to be taken aboard while men were still adrift, forms a little convoy of 3 motor whaleboats, each towing rafts. They steer away from Japanese-held Kolombangara, aiming to clear the Gulf. Another collection of survivors rides current and wind toward Vella La Vella, the next island west. There, over 7 to 8 hour July, coast watchers and Solomon Islanders pull them across the reef, hide them from Japanese patrols, and gather them into safe groups inland. The network that had saved downed aviators all through the campaign now shelters more than 160 Helena sailors. Moving that many men off an enemy-occupied island isn't a PT boat job. The solution is bold: run a mini-armada up to Vella La Vella at night. On 15th and 16th July 1943, destroyers Nicholas and Radford, augmented by Jenkins and O'Bannon, spearhead the extraction, pushing farther up the slot than U.S. surface ships had dared to go. Higgins boats ferry men out under blackout. They bring back 165 survivors, plus several civilians the coast watchers had been protecting, and turn south for home. The story sounds simple. It wasn't. It took nerve, navigation, and the trust built between Americans and locals who risked everything to hide strangers in their bush. Let's take stock with clear numbers and consequences. In the battle itself, Nizuki was sunk, Admiral Akiyama among roughly 300 lost. The Japanese also stranded Nagasaki, later destroyed by air attack, and they landed about 1,600 troops at Vila. The U.S. lost one light cruiser, Helena, and about 168 of her men. Strategically, the fight was a draw. Operationally, the Japanese got troops in but paid in ships. Morally, the Helena rescues became legend. Why did Helena die and yet wouldn't die in memory? Start with technology and tactics. Radar gave Ainsworth first gunfire. Doctrine let 3 cruisers mask that fire quickly. But powder choice, forced by logistics after the earlier bombardment, made Helena's silhouette a beacon. Japanese doctrine paired lookouts with long-lance torpedoes designed exactly for nights like this. Put those together and you see the hinge of the battle. Helena's advantage at finding and hitting was matched by the enemy's advantage at striking unseen from outside the gun duel. The lesson is sober. Tech is a tool. How and when you employ it, and what it costs you elsewhere, decides survival. Then add training. The way Helena's crew abandoned ship wasn't panic. It was procedure under chaos. The way Nicholas and Radford fought, broke contact, and came back to haul men aboard wasn't luck. It was practiced seamanship under a commander willing to risk his destroyers for shipmates. Those choices were recognized. The 2 Fletcher's Presidential Unit citations and Helena's own Navy Unit commendation, the first ever awarded to a U.S. ship, make that clear. Awards don't bring back the lost, but they do tell future crews what the Navy values: initiative, teamwork, and refusing to leave men behind.
Finally, think about memory. The Navy named another cruiser Helena, and still another later in the Cold War. Families kept stories, and survivors stayed tied to the ships that rescued them. And the sea kept its own ledger until 2018, when Paul Allen's research vessel RV Petrel found Helena's wreck resting in New Georgia Sound at about 860 meters, roughly 2,821 feet, depth. Photos show the torn bow and the quiet midships break where the hull folded, the scars that match the war damage diagrams drawn the very month she died. The find didn't change the story. It confirmed it, and gave a place for the last roll call. So what saves a crew when the night turns? Radar helps, yes. Gunnery helps. But in Kula Gulf, it was all 3: tactics, training, and choices, fighting for minutes. Ainsworth's group hit first, but paid for Helena's visibility. Japanese torpedoes did the killing, but American destroyer men, coast watchers, and islanders did the saving. That's why Helena's story still teaches. Technology widens your margin. Discipline and courage use it. Next time, join me for our epilogue. Finding Helena, a look at the wreck discovery, what the ROVs revealed about the breakup, and how the families and the city of Helena carry the name forward. And if you want more carefully sourced World War I, World War II deep dives, subscribe. There's a lot of history left in the dark, waiting for a good light. Sources used in this episode: Naval History and Heritage Command Battle Summary, DANFS, Helena, CL-50. U.S. Navy Combat Narrative for New Georgia, Flashless Powder Detail, USNI accounts of the Kula Gulf timeline, and reporting on the 2018 wreck find.